My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Joel Sokoloff. It's February 17th, 2024. We're at his home in McMinnville. Joel, thank you so much for joining us today. The first question to get things started is why wine?
You'd think that I would have thought of that by now. That is sort of the answer much further down in the story. My story starts way back, and wine was sort of a product of the journey. It wasn't the goal from the outset. Without boring everyone with every last detail of my life, most of which are not germane to the wine story, I started down the path really farming in 2010, so I was in my late 20s, and that decision came about through a whole complex of life circumstances, deviation of interest from one thing to another, and I decided I want to try my hand at farming. I'm going to go apprentice, see if all of my interest that I think is inside can be expressed in a really productive way. In a real farm setting, not just in a book or in a very hypothetical kind of way. So that journey took me to Kitsap County in Western Washington, where I began and worked at a large market garden. And I think the thing that was, there are many things that were really important about that experience. But beyond just, I know when to sow certain seeds or when to prepare the soil and how, it was really the first time that I had any sort of interface with the kind of community and the kind of mentorship that I hadn't had and I didn't even know was really missing. Not that I'd wandered aimlessly through the rest of my life. There were a lot of great things that had to happen to get me there. But I didn't know how important just like a small farming community, a tight-knit community, and having the right people. It sounds like I'm putting a value, right or wrong. Having the most engaged and thoughtful people in your life who understand the journey that you're embarking on and kind of understand you at a deeper level. Just how vital that was. And so starting off in the first year, I'm a greenhorn and I know nothing, but I have exponentially more knowledge and experience than I did just a handful of months prior. And pretty soon I knew this is what I wanted to do. This being an agricultural pursuit. But yeah, over the next couple of years, working on different farms, having more mentorship relayed, and not just given, it has to be earned. You have to seek. You have to be lucky as well. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but I'm afraid I'll forget it if I pass by now and don't come back later. But whether it's in the wine industry, farming in general, kind of anything, but I think especially in these industries, to have mentorship, to have people who believe in you and want to foster your growth and development without expectation of compensation or, perhaps, yes, in blood, sweat, and tears, that's to be expected. But just people who find it really important to them on a different level, a very fundamental level, to pass along knowledge that they've accrued over their lives, and they don't want to see it go to waste or fade away. I know it's a lot of generalities, but it's just kind of the way I think of it. But yeah, I could not impress upon a brand new farmer, vineyardist, etc., enough to find that, to seek that. Because even now, many years later, it still is one of the most important things. Spent some years working on farms. And yes, I was working on mixed market garden type farms. But during that time, I had a lot of influence from people I met, peers, mentors, that helped propel me on what would become more of my wine journey as well. Was introduced to working in vineyards and what that could look like. While I was over in the Puget Sound, certainly when I moved to Walla Walla in 2012, that came to the forefront as well. Also, when I was in Western Washington, that's when I really started to put the pieces together about how I could possibly incorporate working horses into my career. And there are a number of people who I just have nothing but the greatest gratitude towards for that. Because I really loved and appreciated horses as a child. I had this notion that yes, they do farm work and somewhere else out in the world. Also, I grew up in suburbia where, you might be lucky if you saw a tractor every so often. But these were the places where these different facets of my eventual career started to come together. I'd say the biggest turning point was being in Walla Walla, which is funny because I moved there having no idea that there was a wine industry. That was entirely not why I moved there. But much to my great fortune, there's a 2-year enology and viticulture program there, which was of great renown. And in my first year working in Walla Walla on the small farm, doing lots of horse work, lots of farming, just loved it, enjoyed it, but knew that this wasn't it. And I wanted to be more of a career professional. Didn't have land, didn't have the means for it, which is a whole other story. And so I was captivated by the wine world, really being surrounded by vineyards. Grew up with wine in the house and was starting to appreciate it more as an adult, and just, again, made the leap. It's funny how your life can be sort of broken down into a handful of really good or really bad decisions, or a simple twist of fate. As a wiser man than me once said. That just propelled me forward, going to Walla Walla Community College, with a few years under my belt, working with the land, working with the animals, with people, with markets. And yeah, that would be, I guess, the front door to what you're asking about. Why wine? Here's how everything led up to that time. Some of it was certainly a practical decision. I'm here. I want the security of knowing that that my work is a way to value my work and my labor and my knowledge, but also genuinely really interested in tasting, producing wine, all the things I had really no idea about until it happened.
Well, we'll pick it back up there in a second. Let's talk a bit about life before that. You mentioned growing up in the suburbs. Tell me about where you're born and raised, and about the path before wine. Where were you headed before that? What did you sort of think your life was going to be like?
That was a big question, Mark.
It's a big question.
Yeah. Well, originally hail from Deerfield, Illinois, suburb about 20 miles north of the Loop in Chicago, downtown Chicago. There was no agriculture in my life whatsoever, which is so funny because when I started working on farms, I was like, how did this happen, you know? Mm-hmm. There were farmers in my family going back a few generations in Michigan, but it was never anything that I grew up with, that my parents or grandparents pointed me towards. This is much more nature, or the nurture outside of my family. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So yeah, I grew up there. I've lived a few different places. New Mexico. I went to University of Oregon, Eugene. I know this is where I'm supposed to say go Ducks, but again, not a part of my culture. I spent a little bit of time living abroad in northeastern China, which the funny thing about that, when I started my own career in wine, is that I worked at a university teaching English, of course. That was one of just 2 or 3 enology and viticulture programs in the whole country at that time. And so some of my students were actually viticulture students, and it's just a novelty. I'm not someone who thinks that it portended some eventuality in my life, but just one of those funny coincidences that you smile about when you look back. It'd be really interesting if I could reach out to some of them now and see where they are, and if they're winemakers and viticulturalists and that sort of thing. But yeah, before I was farming, I was bouncing around a lot. It was sort of that period in my 20s where I didn't know what career was in store, and just made things work for a while before I decided to take the leap. Living in Portland, and decided, I did love the city, but it was time to go and take that chance.
And what made you think farming was the thing you wanted to do?
I've been reading a lot of gardening books. I had started my own little garden plot on my apartment patio, and was just devouring one book after another about with the culinary aspect, soils, how to grow different crops in that climate. And there was nothing else. I really enjoyed it. But maybe there was just nothing else there at that time captivating my interest. And so it filled the void. I know it's not horribly romantic to think of it that way, but that's how things happen in life. But yeah, go to the library every week and pick up a new book, and it's like, you know what? I want to get out of this urban life, and I want to do something that I really believe in, because I was not on the path.
You talked about when you started being a greenhorn. Tell me about initial lessons learned, and what was it about the work you were doing that made you want to continue pursuing it?
Yeah, that's a good question. We'll do that in reverse order. What made me want to continue doing it? I would say the unity of the community around and feeling that belonging was definitely a big part of it. There was a big social component, and not social like, oh, well, there's a party every Saturday, so I'll just keep doing this. It was more ingrained. It was more foundational than that. And I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of hard work. I didn't have to run the business. Of course, that's a different story. But just the toil and the physical labor part of it was hard, but it was like good hard. And I really enjoyed that. And feeling like I was producing something. All the jobs I'd had before, they're administrative or retail or just things here or there. I'd never produced anything, put the seed in the ground, out came the crop, selling the food to someone that they're going to enjoy. There's something that's so rewarding about that, which of course applies to wine growing, that you just can't replicate. Just continued to love to read about it and felt like there was no reason not to continue. Sometimes that's the reason, is there's no reason not to. But yeah, I would say that was a big part. And then the challenges you were asking about. Yeah.
And lessons learned?
Lessons learned. Lessons learned were, I haven't really thought of them as A, B, and C. There's the good, it's a lot of work, but there's also it's a lot of work. Doesn't always leave you with a lot of spare time. And there wasn't much money. And also that the thought of having my own farm seemed very cost prohibitive. Again, I know we've touched on that a little bit, which we can expound on more down the road if we get time. But starting to see some of those barriers to entry. Can't just be a farm intern forever. And being an itinerant farmer, as I was for 3.5 some years, until I got into the wine world, it's, even with all the, I have some advantages in my life and stability, and it's difficult.
So you mentioned going to Walla Walla, obviously not necessarily for wine. What prompted you to go to community college there and start down that path?
It was there. yeah, I wanted to be a professional farmer, and that seemed like both a very practical path. Wine felt very romantic. I liked the idea of being very specialized. I did, and I still continue to really enjoy growing vegetables, growing flowers, raising animals. But I guess it's just how my brain works, that I felt more comfortable if I focused on one thing. And of course, there's lifetimes of knowledge. We all continue to learn, and it's not like I have it all figured out or anyone has it all figured out. I wouldn't trust anyone who even intimated that they did. But at least it felt like I could really dig in and understand something more completely. And I liked that. And it was fun. It was kind of a fun culture, too. Can't be hard work all the time.
So I'm curious about the education itself and about kind of first introduction to specialized wine work.
Mm-hmm. You mean like the program, kind of how it worked? It was 2 years, and it was roughly divided in half, very roughly divided, with a year of viticulture and a year of enology. And I knew going in that I really wanted to focus on the viticulture side. I wanted to continue down the agricultural path, but also did understand that the winemaking, it was interesting, but that it was really integral to the whole thing. I mean, it's sort of a cliche thing. People say, well, the wine growers, the vineyardists should understand the winemaking and vice versa, and then we're all better informed. But there's a reason why that's said. And so I feel like the education was quite well-rounded. Taking care of your own plot in a vineyard, and from pruning to harvest, learning a lot about soils, had great instruction on just soils and general crop development. I couldn't have recommended the program enough as far as the different dimensions you got. I also had a public speaking class, but we'll have to see how well I've retained that information to this point. We'll let the audience decide.
So with that, as you're in the program, what was your? I assume you were looking for work in the industry, looking for an internship, or looking for work. What was the first thing you did?
My first quarter, I just had some time after class, and it was harvest, and I got. I'm sure this sounds familiar to a lot of people who went down this similar path, but found a winery that I could go and do punch downs at night, and that was pretty much it for the harvest of 2013. Lots of punch downs, good amount of cleaning, getting the first bit of reality, as much as you think you may have it or not, taking some of that, just a sliver of that romanticism out of it. Although it was really, I had this moment when I was working this job where it was the middle of the day on a weekend, and was doing punch downs with one of my workmates there. And the tasting room was right there with the winery. And some people came in, they're well-heeled and dressed very nicely. Of course, they're out on the town, out to taste some wine. And you have these people who, they're professionals. They're no slouches. They're doing well, and they're here to spend some serious money on wine. But they come in and they see the work that we're doing, and this one guy was just like in awe. He's like, "That's the coolest thing. Oh, I wish I was up there." And in what other industry do you have people of great means who would like to switch places with someone doing grunt work and dirty work and that sort of thing? But that's sort of this wild appeal about the wine industry, and I would say there's like a veil on it, not in a pejorative way, but it has this appeal that is difficult to describe. To where I thought that was so fascinating. It's like, really, you want to make $12 an hour doing hard physical labor and risking falling into the tank and all that? Maybe for 30 minutes he would, but it was just interesting. But yeah, that was my first job, and I continued to try and cultivate that mentorship, or even if it wasn't mentorship in sort of the strictest sense of the word, guidance. Find people who gave a shit about me, sometimes I was successful. I had a great experience in school. All the instructors, none of them are there anymore, but the instructors were incredible. I still have relationships with them and talk with them. The curriculum, it was a lot of fun. It's kind of, it's interesting going back to school in your 30s, early 30s, but by far one of the best decisions of my life, and one of many that is why I'm sitting here right now.
So tell me about after you're finishing up your program, and you have the desire to be a professional farmer, obviously. So at that point, what were your options, and what did you do next?
Well, that all kind of started to happen when I was in school. Some of the relationships that I'd been growing during that time. I worked a harvest actually over here in the Willamette Valley my last year of school. And then when I got back, working at the same time with the last couple of quarters of school, I had a job. I was one of those people who, for better or worse, like already had the makings of the career. And it's a give or take. Anyone in a similar position, probably the majority of the people that you've interviewed have the experience of either getting out of school or apprenticeship or whatever that major educational conveyance was, and saying, I don't know what I'm going to do, and having the freedom to shop around, maybe shop around in different hemispheres for a little while, or they clamp down and they're focused on one thing right away. And that was me. I had a job before I even left school, which was great. And that is, much as I look back and, oh yeah, maybe it would have been fun to travel a little bit, that's not really what I was in it for. I was in it for that hunker down, settle down, get your professional career moving. And so very fortunate that I knew a number of the right people. They saw things in me, and I was able to get a job. So even though I haven't been very specific, that job, because it was by far my longest and so pivotal in my career. So as I finished up at Walla Walla Community College, I worked for Cayuse Vineyards in Milton Freewater, Oregon. This is the beginning of my illustrious career in the Oregon wine industry. This is where the story starts, really starts, right? For Linfield. In 2014. So I was hired as a teamster, which is kind of an unusual job position in a vineyard, but I was hired as a seasonal worker, as a teamster, and I drove horses all summer, cultivating the vineyards in the region of the Walla Walla Valley, known colloquially as the Stones, or the AVA is known as the Rocks Milton Freewater, Rocks District Milton Freewater. It's a long
name.
It's hard to remember all those words. And then I came back and that was boom. That was my career. Started to manage the team, manage the horses, manage the crew at large with a team, a small management team. All these things, there's nothing I've done on my own. But so if I say that I did this or I did that, that's rarely the case. But we had a great team, produced a lot of phenomenal wine. Love it or hate it. It's polarizing, but that's a job where I learned so much about what it takes if you want to operate at the highest level in a very specific way. There's people who operate at the highest level in other ways, and there are many ways to go about things. That's one of the things about farming that's really endlessly interesting, is the many different approaches, of which many of them are right. As long as they're right to you. But yeah, that was a very formative time in my career, certainly. But at a certain point, I decided it was time to move on, and I think Walla Walla is a great place to live. That was a great place to work, and again, had wonderful community. But I always thought I would come back to the Willamette Valley. Went to school in Eugene. I lived here for a few years as a young adult. So I started looking to come back to the McMinnville region, and got a job that had for a couple of years, and learned a lot more about viticulture in this region. Some differences, a lot of similarities. But again, I'm so new here, and really after 10 years in the industry, I'm so new. I still feel like I'm very new to wine growing. Every time I read an article or talk to someone who knows more than me, I feel a bit humbled, but usually in a good way. It's important to know your limitations.
Well, let's talk a bit about your time in the Rocks District. Obviously, a very unique part of Oregon wine, and obviously Cayuse is doing some unique things even within that. So let's start with the horses. Obviously, you mentioned using horses in farming was something that you had been excited about for a bit there. Tell me about getting used to that, getting used to using horses in that way, and what their impact is versus other types of agriculture.
Sure. Could be a very in-depth conversation all its own if you want to come back someday. I'll try and keep things approachable. We'll just start with the region. That area of the Walla Walla Valley outside of Milton Free Water is an ancient riverbed that's littered with cobbles, river rock, but not just superficial cobbles, deep strata of cobbles, which makes it really a very unique, I don't know who it was, I don't want to misquote, but wine writers are like, this is the most unique growing region in the United States, or most exciting, or what have you. Some things that make it really different are its propensity for extremes. So harsh cold winters, which every so often kill the vines back to the ground, at the very least kill the fruiting tissues that are exposed to the environment. So you have very cold, low-lying area. So the winter creates some serious issues for growing grapes there, vinifera grapes there. And conversely, very hot summers. Not only are the summers quite warm in Walla Walla, but having those stones, which are these great heat sinks, both on the surface of the soil, but also, as I mentioned, way deep into the soil strata, that heat doesn't penetrate way down. We all know how that works, but it creates a mesoclimate that is quite unique through the temperature, UV radiation, the composition of the soils, which are extremely low in clay, very high in sand and silt. So extreme drainage, but also fairly fertile. So you have all these different circumstances that they're unusual to have all in one place. And so that's part of it. And I know it's really hard without visuals. That's what it'd be like if I have my little slides here to show you photos. But that's a big part of it. And yeah, beyond just the environment in which we grew, the way the vines are trained there, of which there are a multitude of approaches. But you see vines trained much lower to the ground. There's cane pruning there, which is very unusual in Eastern Oregon and Eastern Washington. Some would argue necessity, but certainly the way we did it was burying canes and burying fruiting buds to protect and ensure against cold damage. So a lot of challenges. There's wind machines everywhere. Managing irrigation with the extremely low water holding capacity of the soils was another thing. Extremely low water holding capacity, but the roots go so deep because there's oxygen quite far down, this really light soil texture and all these air pockets. And so you think, oh, you have to water the vines all the time, but you're also balancing vines that really have water uptake many feet down, 8, 9, 10 feet below the surface. It's a challenge. It is a challenge. But you get very unique product. It comes down to what's in the bottle. You know, there's lots of ways to grow, to market the wine, sales channels, all that, but what's in the bottle. And that region produces different types of wine, principally Rhone varietals, that can be, if they're grown and produced in a way that is respectful of the terroir, it's very unique. It's really special. So that was cool. And yeah, the way that we did things, you know, have to be even more special. Not have to, but they were. It was a mixed power farm. Mixed power meaning animal and mechanical cultivation. So while there were many vineyards that were farmed with tractors, by the time I had left, we were farming over 18 acres with horses. We had a team of 6 horses and 3 full-time teamsters and myself. At that point, I wasn't doing much horse driving as I was a manager. A lot of us watching this video know how that is. But it was really cool because I got to stay involved with that. I still was involved, for sure, even if I wasn't picking up the lines every morning. But yes, farming with the horses, especially in that terrain, had some really unique challenges. I hope not everyone's nodding off at this point as we talk about the esoterica. But highly specialized equipment all came from France, super heavy duty for cultivating in this unforgiving terrain. The horses all wore just the biggest, heaviest shoes you could imagine. The harness is all really heavy. Everything's just heavy, tough. The work's slow. We're cultivating 3 to 3.5 foot rows. It's a lot of walking. It was a lot of walking. And so everyone stayed in pretty good shape. But yeah, it was like anything, it's on the one hand, painstaking detail work, and then lots of redundant work, almost at the same time. But it was a really beautiful way to grow. It was challenging. You had the animals, which beyond just the skill of driving the animals and knowing how do you harness them, how do you hook them to an implement, how do you drive them, which is a skill that in this day and age fewer and fewer people have. It's maintaining the equipment, the harness, grooming the animals, knowing what to look for in their health, caring for their feet, coming in extra early on a July day because it's going to be 103 degrees that day. So you're there at 4 in the morning, getting them ready. They can only work till 9:30 or 10 in the morning. So taking our very modern conception of what it is to farm, come on, get there and go out there and do it, which there's obviously a place for. You can't have the same expectations of a timeline. You're really working much more on the animal's timeline. And you, the person handling and driving those horses has to be so much more aware of your mood, your attitude, the energy that you're giving off, the energy they're giving back, and knowing what your mutual limitations may be day to day, hour to hour. Although it's very physically demanding, it's also very thinking man and thinking woman's sort of pursuit as well. On top of that, the viticultural challenge is growing vines at super high density, one vine per post, per stake, irrigated. There's a lot of canopy management that's just so far above and beyond what most anyone would do. It's extremely expensive. It's very difficult to learn how to do it well, do it consistently. And I don't want to drone on and on about that, but with you asking, well, what are some of the challenges? They are many. But it's also very rewarding. When you get into this amazing groove with your horse, with your machine, with yourself, you're just in this elevated zone of efficiency, appreciation for the work you're doing. People would ask, well, what are the advantages of farming with horses? That is definitely a conversation I would table for another time, because there's a million variables and it's not the right decision for everyone. It's probably not the right decision for most people, but the personal enjoyment reward part of it is very high. And when you're farming like that, you really get to know that terroir extremely well. Not to disparage driving in tractors, of course we need them. They're essential. It's not a right or wrong. But when you're driving the horse and you have your hand on a piece of steel that's directly connected to the ground underneath you, and you're walking that ground, and you can feel everything going on. Where's the ground harder? Where is it looser? More stones, fewer stones? Where are the vines more vigorous, less vigorous? And you just absorb it. That's really cool.
It's obviously a pretty unique role and a pretty unique place. I'm curious, for you and your time there, what was the reward? Was the reward the finished wine? Was the reward the relationship with the horses? Was the reward, what was most rewarding about the work you were doing?
Well, there are many things. The finished wine, for sure. As I mentioned earlier in this chat, while that wine can be very polarizing, good, great. Would my late grandmother love drinking it? Probably not, but it's okay that it's not for everyone and it's not for every day. But it is just a beautiful artisan product that takes a lot of time and a lot of sweat and a lot of work to produce. And whether it's that wine or another that was made of that amount of, that kind of pride, and that kind of, with that follow through, I respect the work. I think that's really important. And something you can't really put a price tag on. But yeah, from my perspective, that's part of the enjoyment. And yeah, it was just a great group of people, strong leadership, a lot of support, working with the horses and also taking people who had never worked with them or hardly, and then seeing them cultivate their own relationship with the animals, with the work, and seeing them being proud of what they did. Yeah, that was hugely rewarding. And having other people appreciate it. Once in a while, putting a little perspective on it with outsiders, distributors or students or any number of, select visitors that we had, having them just see what we were doing with this awe, which is really cool, but you do it every day and you kind of forget that perspective. So yeah, it was really rewarding.
So you had mentioned earlier that after you spent a number of years at Cayuse and then wanted to come back to the Valley at some point. So tell me about what you were looking for at that point. What was it you were seeking out, and what did you find that brought you back to the Willamette Valley?
I didn't know exactly what I was seeking out, but I figured it would look something like what I had in Eastern Oregon. Was certainly looking to continue my career. But I think what I was seeking out was, I know it's funny to say that I really love the physical environment here as it's pouring on a February, and no one said we're famous for our winters. But I did kind of crave the greenery of the regions west of the Cascades. And there's just, the wine world is so much bigger in the Willamette Valley. And I figure there's more opportunity. I would like to work in a cooler climate. I wouldn't call this a cool climate, but it is certainly quite a bit cooler than Walla Walla. Again, climate is a discussion for a whole other time. But yeah, it was intriguing to me. It was definitely more of an emotional decision. Mm-hmm. It's just something that I wanted. And I have, fond memories of living in this area and being surrounded by farmland, and the agricultural world is more diverse. There are swaths of monoculture, whether it's grass seed, wine grapes, hazelnuts, or any other, but a lot more diverse than the Walla Walla area. Not that there aren't things that I miss there, but I do like living here. Traffic's not great.
Agreed.
Something to get used to. I spent a couple of years doing something similar, working mostly on the vineyard side, but with vegetables and animals as well, and which was really cool because I'd kind of been missing that from my life. But at this point, I am probably going to, continue this journey through the wine world. It's what I know. It's something that I've devoted a really significant chunk of my life to, and there's a lot of things I love about it. Nothing's perfect, but I have to see what what sort of forms that will take, because I know still a lot of things I don't know, but I know a lot more than I did 10 years ago, and I know more about wine growing, but I also know a lot more about myself, and so that's just kind of where I'm at.
You talked earlier about sort of barriers to entry into being a professional farmer, and obviously land costs and all of that is one of them. So is that something that is on the horizon for a goal for you down the road? Do you want to be at the top of the food chain at some point?
Hadn't thought of it that way, but I would like to have some land. I'd love to grow some grapes on that land, among other things. It all feels too abstract. The cost of land anywhere in this region is absurd. You have to be wealthy or come from a landed family, a farming family here, or seek out financial backing. Maybe there's some other permutations. This is not meant to be all-inclusive. But I don't have any of those. And I don't know if they're worth it. I'm not unhappy with what I have. And so I'm not in a rush to do so, but it would be nice to have a piece at some point. It's never going to be on a commercial scale. The cost of land and then developing a vineyard, it feels very far away. Mm-hmm. And there may be people watching this who say, well, I did it. And that's great. Everyone's situation is a little different. And I applaud those who do. People have to do it. But I'm sure there's also a lot of people like, yeah, that's my situation too. Of course, that gets into major discussions about the economy and inflation and the cost of money and real estate and all those sort of things that I'm not a specialist on. But whether it's here, back in Walla Walla, almost anywhere, land is very expensive, and farms don't tend to make a lot of money, and not for quite a while. You see this more in the region now as you have big investment firms coming in and scooping up agricultural land. Maybe it's wine grapes, maybe it's vegetable seed. It doesn't really matter. They don't care. That's been happening for decades. But I would say that at least the Willamette Valley is feeling that quite acutely right now. And whether it's on the agricultural side, the residential side, Joel Sokoloff doesn't have the kind of means like Blackstone or any of the mega $1 trillion corporations out there that you could argue all day about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the indifferent about it. But the reality is that the barrier to entry for someone like me, who's just a normal person, it feels very out of reach.
Talk about your farming a little bit, farming style a little bit. Obviously, you have had a lot of influences, a lot of different places worked. How would you describe your sort of farming philosophy at this point? And as you're looking for the next thing you do, what are you kind of looking for to align with that?
I would say that my farming style and philosophy was a style. It depends a lot on that place. I tend to be fairly practically minded. I want to do things in a practical way, efficient. There's definitely a strong get it done mentality, but I also really try and balance that with how can we do this work respectfully in a way that doesn't just look at what we're doing today or tomorrow, but what are the consequences down the line. And I know that all sounds vague, and someone could just say that if they wanted to, sure. It's you know, it's hard to put it in a real concrete perspective, but it's a balance. Like, everyone balances both the practical side, budgetary constraints, demand for efficiency with quality and long-term thinking. Where am I in the middle? Somewhere. I'm a moderate in that regard, but I would say a little heavier weighted in the let's think about what we're doing, let's think about the consequences, and take our time trying to make the right decision, rather than just like, hey, let's go do it and get it done and be on to the next thing. If I could say that, if I had the luxury to do so, which I hope everyone does, it's a good way to go. And then, yeah, the wine world tends to look at these things in the paradigm of, as for farming style, like more easily categorizable segments. Like, are you conventional, sustainable, organic, biodynamic, regenerative? Which boxes can you check? Well, I don't think any of that's not really the important part. That philosophically, trying to make the least amount of impact on the land as you can is important. And I don't mean just like what you put on the back of a bottle, but truly thinking about, well, do we have to irrigate this or do we not? Do we have to cultivate this or not? What are we going to plant here to improve soil quality? How many times are we going to spray? What are we going to spray? What does the vine balance look like, so that we can grow strong roots, so that we can let the vine do more of what it needs to with less of our input? Those are the things that don't fit neatly, in a blurb on the bottle or an icon that a consumer can look at. And those things are important for the consumer, and they're important for when people are marketing wine. But I think myself and my peers can look beyond that and talk about more situationally. What do we do? What do you do in situation X, Y, or Z? And having a roundtable discussion, you can learn a lot about someone and their philosophies. But again, there's just way too many variables and way too little time, and I don't want to monopolize people's attention spans. They probably have meetings to get to. But yeah, somewhere in there, the less you can do, the better. But the fact of the matter is, we're growing a crop. It's not native to this area. We're farming. All farming has an impact. We're not growing grapes in a permaculture garden. And so that's where the practicality side of it balances on the do least harm.
So I'm curious about your impressions of Oregon. Obviously, a lot of your impressions of Oregon wine industry are not necessarily of the Valley first, but of the Walla Walla area first. How have you seen the industry change in the time you've been part of it? And especially with regard to that, your past answer in terms of sort of farming practices, both on the industry side and on the consumer side. What are the kind of the biggest growths you've seen there?
I'll try to take a pretty balanced perspective here, but again, in my short career, there's only so much I've seen. And I haven't worked all over the world. But you're asking about the Oregon industry as a whole, which is a very diverse place. Changes that I've seen, talking about philosophy, definitely an increase in people weaning themselves from conventional farming systems, more people farming in an organic, kind of small organic fashion, and some people in a big O, as in certified organic or certified biodynamic, and all those sort of registries. So there's definitely more of an emphasis as there become more tried and true ways of doing things. It's becoming less risky to do that, and to convince people that they can do it successfully. So fortunately, seeing a lot more acreage that's not being sprayed with herbicides. People aren't using systemic chemistries as much. That's all great benefit. I know there's a counterbalance to every argument, but I see that as generally as a great benefit to the plants, but also one thing that we haven't really talked about is, the human factor. I used to help manage pretty big crew of people who were all working in the vines and exposed to these products, and operators who are spraying them. And I feel better. I feel more comfortable using spray chemistries that are softer. It doesn't mean benign. Don't get angry at me and write me hate mail about how organic chemicals have risks too. Yeah, I know. We all do. But what would you rather expose your child to? Think of it that way. So that's great to see as a whole. People trying to raise their plants in that kind of way. So that's one change that's really positive. Another change that I would say is there's pluses and minuses. I'm sort of neutral on is vastly increased mechanization, both here in the Willamette Valley, Walla Walla Valley, no doubt in the Columbia Gorge, in the southern Appalachians of Oregon. Again, such a complex subject as it relates to labor and cost of labor and availability to labor and immigration. All those things that, sincerely are really tough. And they're tough because these are real, there's real people and consequences and all that, even though oftentimes these subjects are spoken about in legal terms and in the abstract. But I don't even want to get any further into that, other than to say, as we all are probably aware, with overtime laws, labor will become more expensive. Availability of labor isn't improving, and so the mechanization will only increase. I think there's pros and cons to that. That's a whole other roundtable there. But definitely have seen a lot of increase in mechanization, both in general vineyard operations and harvesting. Way more fruit being harvested with machines every year. Those are a couple of the big things that I've seen change. We talked a little bit about land acquisitions and big corporate interests coming in, which I'm certainly no specialist on. But the fact of the matter is that there are just not that many farms, we'll say vineyards, that are passed from generation to generation anymore. For those who are the exception, I think that's wonderful. There's many ways that can look. The vine it's a long-lived woody perennial, 25, 50 plus years hopefully. And it used to be seen in this very multi-generational, passed down, father to son, mother to daughter fashion. The very nature of it changes when you have people owning farms that they're never going to see out the existence of that vine or pass that vine along to a family member, a loved one, another person who in some way, shape, or form is going to carry on the tradition. And so when you have this relatively short timeline for turning over a farm, a property, this agricultural productive land, it creates some challenges, to put it lightly. Can it be a good thing? I'd like to give that benefit of the doubt that the tide can raise all boats, and if I got that right, and that more investment in vineyards raises awareness of brand Oregon all the way down to the smallest producer. But it does feel contradictory to the life cycle and the nature of the vine. So I think we have to see how things go. One cool thing that I think I've seen more and more is small producers, like micro producers, garagistes, if you will, that kind of scale. People who 10, 15 years ago you didn't see a lot of. Of course, someone's going to raise their hand and say, I've been doing this forever. I get it. These are broad brush strokes. But I think there's a lot more people who are getting involved on the ground level, making wine on a small scale, being experimentative, which is really hard for bigger companies that have a style and a brand that they're looking to preserve. You're small, you're flexible, you're fast, you're adaptable, and that's really cool. And also, here's a point of entry for people who are looking to be in the wine industry. They want to create wine, but they don't have the millions of dollars that's usually necessary. So it's really cool. There's more infrastructure now for that. There's more awareness in the public. I think there are many facets of the public that demand, or at least are super interested in small producers, lower input style of winemaking, varietals that aren't the norm, all the sort of things that keep people really curious and engaged. So it's nice to see that greater diversity. Those are sort of the main things, I would say, that come to mind. They're kind of here, there, and everywhere. And wine from all over Oregon gaining traction in the national and I'm sure international wine world. I don't follow these things very closely, especially internationally, but Oregon as a whole, the Willamette Valley being the heart of it, if you will, certainly the economic engine, has established itself very well. And so I think we have a prosperous future ahead.
Let's talk about that future from your perspective. What do you see coming next for Oregon wine? What do you maybe hope is coming next? And are there things that you're fearful of in the industry's future?
This is February 2024. I hope somebody in a couple years is watching this and everything I say feels very temporal. And they're like, oh yeah, everything is wonderful. Things right now for the wine industry, and it's not just the Willamette Valley or Oregon, it's wines from Italy, France, Texas, you name it. Things are challenging, and I am certainly not an expert. Friends and I have talked about, well, why is this? And I was just at the wine symposium, and they talked, there were actual professionals who talked about this. But there is a lot of wine out there. There are a lot of vineyards, and people are certainly protecting more how they spend their discretionary money, and tastes are changing. I think the big thing, and we know this, and not the science, but the statistics are there, is I think that we're looking at a real sea change in consumer preferences. Older people are getting older, and all the things that come with that. And then younger people are not taking the reins and taking over their parents' wine club. Maybe they're not interested, they don't have the money, or both. So I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're looking at a real paradigm shift in the way that consumers do consume. Less in the way of big quantities, less in the way of 3 cases of, from this winery, wine club, and 3 from that, and 3 from that. There's just fewer people who can afford that. And wines in general in the Willamette Valley are expensive. They really are, if you look at it in the whole picture. And so that, and even those people who do want to continue to drink wine and drink it regularly, they want more diversity, they want more value, all sorts of things that pose hurdles to real successful business. I'm not saying any of this like, at the end I'm going to give everyone the solution. If I had that, Piper and I would be living in a mansion, or actually not in a mansion, but on a great fine estate. which we would be planting the first 50 acres this fall. But I think that's, the big challenge, oversupply. There's a lot of fruit out there, and the market's just not quite there with the supply. We're certainly seeing this in Washington in a big way. Oregon is not immune to that. We're special, but not that special. We're all so closely connected. So yeah, I think those are the things that concern me. Those are the things I can't do anything about. But I am hopeful because, like I was talking about how the vine has a long lifespan, and seeing it through and planning for the future, that this also, the arc will be will come back to a more prosperous place, and where we're more optimistic, and the growth will probably be more measured as well. Things grew really fast for the last decade throughout the Pacific Northwest, and the good times can continue, but it's a heck of a party. But I think this trend cannot be sustained. But that's kind of one of the nice things for the bigger producers have to think about how to position themselves, and that's a lot of financial stuff I don't know anything about. But then, the small producers, the micro producers we were just talking about, who are they're really nimble, and they have a very hands-on relationship with their customer base. That allows you to hopefully continue on successfully. I think that even bigger producers can kind of take that mentality, like, how can we be more hands-on, not just like follow the trends, but how can we appear as, and truly be, but at least appear as authentic and as engaged as possible with our customer base. I think we'll see a real trend in that way. And that can look like many different things. But yeah, it's all food for thought. And every one of these topics that we've talked about, we could just go on about. And every time I'm talking about it, I'm like, well, am I getting too far over this way, that way? I'm being very vague, but there's only time to be very vague about a lot of this stuff. So if you have come this far in the video, thank you. Even if it was on 1.5 speed, that's all right. Maybe in actuality, that is the correct speed to watch. But yeah, I'm optimistic, cautiously optimistic, but that's kind of how I live my life anyway. So, I'm sure I'll think of more things after the camera goes off. But
everyone always does.
Yeah.
Well, that is all the questions that I have for you.
Okay.
So is there anything I didn't ask that I should have, or anything that we didn't cover here today that you'd like to cover?
No, I don't think so. I know no one really is asking my advice, but for anyone who is getting into wine growing, seek mentorship. Try to keep your mind in the big picture. Don't be afraid to take a few risks.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, sharing your menagerie of pets with us as well. And we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
All right.
Thank you.